but almost 2 million children are still dying every year from vaccine-preventable diseases. So we're very fortunate to have a wonderful panel today to talk with you about the power of vaccines. But I also wanted to tell you briefly about a new campaign that the United Nations Foundation and our partners is unveiling to you and introducing to you this week. It's called Shot at Life, and its goal is to empower and educate and connect Americans to become champions for vaccines for the millions of children in developing countries who still don't have access to them. So we'll show you a short video about what we're planning to do, but we also want to invite you to follow us on Twitter at Shot at Life, to visit our Facebook page, Shot at Life Campaign, and come check out our new website, shotatlife.org. So now I thank you for your attention to this short video. Thank you. And now it's my privilege to introduce award-winning journalist David Muir of ABC News, who recently returned from Somalia, where he reported on how measles is ravaging children who are already been devastated by famine and displacement, and he will introduce our distinguished panel. Thank you very much. David.
This is such a welcome break. I'm working on a piece for World News this evening on the satellite hurtling toward Earth right now. So it's nice to be part of the last forum here in New York City. They mentioned that we're just back from Somalia, and we returned this weekend, and one of the most powerful things from the reporting, obviously, is the second wave of disaster across the Horn of Africa, and particularly in Somalia, where there are no immunizations, vaccines. As you know, the vaccines that we take for granted in this country and the developing world does not. And in fact, this second wave of disaster, the measles outbreaks, we were in the Mogadishu's main hospital, where they've now quarantined the children who've come down with measles. And in reading the research for this forum, it was almost hard to believe, even after having traveled to that part of the world, that the number of children who die in the developing world every year from preventable disease is equal to about half of the children who went off to kindergarten in this country this year alone. So we'll keep that in mind as we head into this next panel and think about how easy it would be to really make change. I want to introduce these two women who sit next to me here and their efforts to make change for the children in the developing world. And I'd want to begin with Dr. Geeta Rao Gupta. She may look familiar to all of you. She is the senior fellow with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and she was the president of the International Center for Research on Women. Chrysula Winegar is a mother, her chief role, and she's an entrepreneur. She has 4 young children, and you have said that they have taught you infinitely more than all of your time spent working for blue chip companies that we all know, Ernst & Young, Estee Lauder among them. Always intrigued by the relationship between companies, families, and individuals and their power that they can harness right from their own living room, their own kitchen. She's now using her blog, ChrysulaWinegar.com, to push for what she calls the holy trinity of individual knowledge, responsibility, corporate culture and policy, and careful baseline legislation. Let's welcome both women to the forum today. And Geeta, if I could begin with you, we were talking backstage here about how simple it is to get vaccinations around the world. When we reported on World News last week that one measles vaccination costs 24 cents, the viewers responded in the first 24 hours after World News aired, buying enough doses to give shots to 138,000 children in the developing world. It was just getting the word out. How much of a difference could we make if we just worked on vaccines alone?
A huge difference. It is by far the most cost-effective way to save a child's life. We just released some good news last week that the number of children below the age of 5 that are dying due to preventable causes has dropped from over 12 million a year to about 7.6 million a year. But that's still 12,000 children below the age of 5 dying due to preventable causes every day. And that's just a moral outrage. And vaccines are the simplest, most cost-effective way to give those children a shot at life. So we have to do everything that's possible to make every child get the vaccine that he or she needs. And you know, at UNICEF, our executive director always says to us, your job is to reach the 5th child. And that's because 4 in 5 children across the world have access to vaccines. It's that 5th child that gets left out. And so that's our mantra these days. We want to reach the child who's not being reached.
The 5th child. And as you point out, the numbers are staggering. Every 20 seconds we lose a child in this world who could have been saved by a vaccine. Let me ask you about the other barrier, because it's not just the 24 cents. That would seem so simple for all of us here, but when we were in Mogadishu, there's no real government still there after the last one collapsed 20 years ago, and we found clinics run by UNICEF, but down sort of hidden alleyways to get to them, and these mothers who walk, you know, farther than we can imagine to get their child vaccinated. Is that part of the difficulty in getting the vaccinations to the children who need them?
That's right. It's the health system in countries that needs to be strengthened in order to make vaccines available. Because vaccines need, and this is somewhat technical, but they need a cold chain. You know, they need storage facilities. There's a whole sort of way in which they have to be transported in order for them to be effective when they are used. And if those systems are not in place, if the providers are not trained appropriately, if access is an issue, you mentioned distance, that can be a huge issue. So we need to be able to have community health workers out there in communities and places that are difficult to reach, trained to provide vaccinations for it to be able to reach those marginalized, disadvantaged communities.
You talk
who
about
need it most.
the transportation, and I think this is something I'd never thought of either, but in the hospital, they have rolling electricity. They're lucky if they have power for 6-7 hours at a time in Mogadishu. They have no freezers to hold the vaccine.
That's exactly right.
And UNICEF had brought a freezer to one of these tiny clinics that we came upon, and it made me realize that in every part of this journey to get vaccinations there, the developing world needs help. I'm going to bring in Chrysula now because she's sort of the social component of all this, and I have Twitter hooked up to my BlackBerry. So we're going to take a few Twitter questions, and I'm told you can tweet backstage. They're going to bring me the questions, and also I can give a little plug, but it's at David Muir ABC, and you can try to tweet me in here if there is a signal, and I'm pretty sure there is because it's already lighting up. So in the meantime, I'll read your questions, but Chrysula, I wanted to ask you because in traveling to Kenya and Somalia in July, we traveled with a lot of the mom bloggers. Some of them part of the One campaign, as you know well, but blogging all over this country. How big of a difference can you make from your own kitchen, your own living room, through the power of your own words?
Firstly, let me say that there is nothing like diminutive like saying you're just a mother. And so I want to say to anybody who is listening to my voice, there's no such thing as just a mother. You are a mother, and however that translates for you, whatever iteration that is in your life, you have the power to communicate. It's not only writing a blog, which is something that I'm completely obsessed about and love, but it's what we put on our Facebook feeds. It's what we put on our Twitter feeds. Mothers are incredibly engaged. You know, there are 30 million American mothers with children under the age of 18, and 4 million of them have blogs. That's 15% of US mothers blogging. That's an astounding number. So whether you have thousands and even millions of readers, or whether you have a couple of hundred really committed, engaged people who form your community, that's an incredibly powerful thing. And as we have found communities here, we've talked a lot about the radicalization of women in the global development conversation. Well, blogging has been a radical act for mothers here. We mother in isolation these days. We don't mother in a community the way we used to. And so blogging has done that. It's generated this incredible opportunity for us to really connect and share stories. And Facebook and Twitter and so on are sort of the vehicles that gets shared and disseminated. It's incredibly exciting.
One of the things I feel like I have to point out is obviously I'm not a mom, but I try to report that in all these pieces on the blogging and in our traveling. The mother is the voice of the home. And so if you're not the mom, if you're the husband, the partner, the children, the moms often lead the conversation in the home anyway. My sister, I saw her over the weekend and was asking about the reporting in Africa, and I told her I was going to be part of this forum, and she said, well, how do I turn, because she blogs already about, she works on an organic farm, but she said, how do I turn the corner to a cause that I care about in my writing and galvanize the community? Do you have a tip or tips that people can follow in order to sort of pivot? They already have things they care about, but how do you make that turn in your writing?
It's finding the point of connection that makes you care. And, you know, we have cause fatigue. We have a million interests competing with us for attention rather here in the US. There are domestic concerns. It's not a mutually exclusive proposition, first of all, to care about multiple things. But second of all, we need to take the time to find what resonates. There's a couple of bloggers I want to mention who have done that extraordinarily well. For example, Squidalicious.com. So Squidalicious writes about vaccines, amongst many other things. She writes about technology. She writes about mothering. And she has documented her journey in the vaccination process and has really made it part of her mission to put out the truth, positive facts, really meaningful information that help other mothers get some great content. What's even more exciting about her work is that she receives countless messages from her community saying, thank you. You have helped me. You've given me a framework. You've given me language. There's also a blogger I want to call out who's actually here today, and she was a One Mom's partner. Her name's Catherine Stone. She writes a blog called Postpartum Progress. And she is able to engage with her community on this topic because she's done the research, she's done the homework, she knows her issue backwards, frontwards, inside out, which is writing about postpartum depression. She's helped thousands of women in this country and abroad. But she also knows her issue well enough that she understands that a depressed mother doesn't take her child to the doctor to finish their vaccine schedule. And that has implications for this program, as you know far better than I. And so she's able to take the thing that connects her to her community and then leverage it into another issue that's critically important.
That's critical, actually, to think of, to take what you're sort of an expert in, depression, and to know infinitely better than the rest of us how that affects an issue like vaccinations. I got a question. It worked. I have a signal in here. This one's from Ninja Emily. I can't see you all, but I know you're out there somewhere. Are vaccines in the developing world the same as we give our children here? And Geeta, I think you'd be the best to answer that.
Yes, they are the same. The polio vaccine is an oral vaccine in the developing world. Here it's an injectable vaccine. The oral vaccine is cheaper. So they're cheaper forms. The cost is significantly different in the developing world because of efforts made largely by UNICEF and other players to buy vaccines in bulk so that the price can be reduced by suppliers for the developing world. But yes, the quality of the vaccines, the standard of the vaccines, the types of vaccines are the same. And there's a whole new initiative called, not that new anymore, called Gavi, the Gavi Alliance, that actually provides vaccines for the developing world. And several countries in the north Northern Hemisphere provide the resources for Gavi to be able to do that. And Gavi has also invested in getting new vaccines out to the developing world. So there's now a pneumococcal vaccine for pneumonia that's slowly being introduced in the developing world that wasn't available before. There's the rotavirus vaccine for diarrhea that wasn't available, for a type of diarrhea that's caused by the rotavirus. So with all of this new investment in trying to get vaccination out there, we are beginning to see some success. And I think that that's an important ingredient, even in people getting involved, that these are not, when we state these numbers, sometimes they seem like insurmountable problems. It's overwhelming to hear the numbers of people suffering. But in this particular instance, we have had success. We're very close to having a polio-free world. 99% of new cases of polio new cases of polio have dropped by 99% the world over, and there are only a few countries now where you have cases of polio anymore. And so with the targeted, intensive effort, we can eradicate polio. It's really within our reach.
So close.
Very close. And so it's a question of resources, it's a question of political will, and it's getting organized. Yeah. It's getting organized to make country governments give it priority and attend to the job that needs to be done. So that's the message that I think helps people get involved in movements of this kind, to get organized, is that it's not just that it's a problem that has a solution, which is why it's a moral outrage when we can't get our act together to do something about it.
One of the things that we try to do on the broadcast with Diane Sawyer, and it's a conversation I have with her often, we have a lot of issues here at home, obviously, with the economy and hunger right here at home. And so when I came back from Somalia the first time, we felt a responsibility to report on the children in our own country. But one of the things that we try to do in doing the reporting is even though the numbers, as you point out, Geeta, seem insurmountable, is to give a tool, at least at the end of the report, so people at home know that they can make a difference, and that 24-cent vaccination, just hearing that it's under a quarter, I'm sure is why so many people went online that night. And Caroline B03, who's in the audience, wanted to know what can people in this room do to support the UN Foundation's new Shot at Life program and UNICEF and the other programs that are providing vaccinations to help save some of these children's lives. So a 24-cent example. Are there others out there, easy ways that you can make a difference, as soon as this forum's over?
I think the Shot at Life campaign is exactly the campaign that's trying to do just that, to get each of you to contribute, to advocate, to write to your congressman, to do all that's necessary to make this happen. And UNICEF, the Gavi Alliance, and WHO are all going to benefit from that effort. So, and those are the big, large international players that are making vaccination and immunization happen the world over. So that's a great mechanism. I think the Shot at Life mechanism is a good one.
And from a social media perspective, you saw that film at the beginning, and any of you who have children in your life, today's picture day at my kids' school. So I've got 3 toothless tigers. All 3 of my eldest have all lost teeth recently. So, it's a snaggletooth photo. It's the year of the snaggletooth photo in the school pictures in my family. And every kid deserves that chance to have that snaggletooth photo. Write about it on your blog. Find what your connection is to this issue. It's not a sexy issue. Polio, I'm on this stage because 25 years ago I was a Rotary Exchange student to South Africa, and Rotary Exchange Rotary International had just launched their massive campaign to end polio, and the world was this close to ending polio. Well, 25 years later, we're this close to ending polio, and I want that mother gone. I want it done. I still remember it. I have an aunt who's living with polio, and we've forgotten what these things look like. They have to go.
And as you point out, they're not sexy things to write about, and maybe you could help me with this next question, which is one that I often hear. It's similar to what I mentioned a moment ago. As I travel this country, people will say, well, we have so many issues here at home when they see me off in Somalia or overseas reporting some of these other stories. And I try to say, well, we're part of a global community now, that helping the child in Somalia or in the refugee camp in Kenya helps us all. But I think the blogging effort and the voices online can help connect us in a global way, and I'm wondering if you can weigh in on that.
Well, firstly, as I said earlier, they're not mutually exclusive. It is possible in the same heart to care about the child down the road and the child 10,000 miles away. And so it's really taking that inner time to reflect and find out, how can I make a small difference? How can I connect? And what's my story that layers on top of their story? You know, my space is all about storytelling. As Kathy Calvin said on Monday, I'm not sure who she was quoting originally, but the facts tell, the story sells. That's what we do. We're storytellers. Find what our story is and layer it over the top.
I think that's an important point, if I could interject,
Please.
David. I think to find a cause that you really will put your heart and energy behind requires you to relate some part of your life or somebody you know to the cause that you pick. That's how most people get engaged in causes, is it somehow affects you deeply because it's either affected somebody in your family or you've seen it close by, at close quarters. I mean, that's how I got involved in women and children's well-being. You know, my grandmother died at the age of 32 in childbirth. I grew up in India. I have a friend who has polio, who's my age. So, and that's India. And I think of the health systems that exist there, the trained doctors, the people with higher education, the incredible opportunities I enjoyed studying in India and working in India, and that those things happen so recently is what motivated me to think about what should I be contributing to, what should I be doing with my time in my life. And that if I could do something with my education to rectify those inequities, it's a worthwhile cause. But it could be any cause. There's so many causes that we can all contribute to. I would say pick the one that's close to and dear to your heart and go after it, work for it.
This is a question that came in backstage. We talked about vaccinations being one of the simplest ways to save a child's life. This person writes in, what are the number 2, number 3 ways to save a child's life that perhaps we haven't thought about?
Well, there's, you know, the number of deaths that occur in the first month of life, for example, neonatal deaths. That's 40% of all child deaths below the age of 5. And that number, that proportion in that age group is actually increasing with time. So I said a minute ago that the number of children dying below the age of 5 is reduced, but the number dying in the first month of life, that proportion has actually increased because we haven't succeeded in doing what's necessary to help children just after they're born and to help mothers during delivery. There's still far too many mothers. Over 350,000 mothers are dying in childbirth. Totally preventable deaths. And their babies, you know, due to just being suffocated because of the not having available the suction bulb to pull out the mucus from a newborn's throat, you know, kills babies these days in the developing world. That's a suction bulb. Shouldn't be so difficult to get that one commodity, and yet it's too expensive and not available. Oral rehydration therapy for a child who has diarrhea, together with zinc. We know that these are cheap, should be available, are simple solutions that any mother anywhere can apply to save her child from dying of diarrhea. That's not available. So there's lots of commodities, not just vaccines, that need to be out there. And it's all along that supply chain. It's the cost of global procurement. It's the national delivery, so having it shipped to the countries that need it. Then within that, having it reach the health center or the post or the clinic where the most disadvantaged communities live. Having the family have the information and knowledge that this product exists and here's how you use it. Being able to access it. So every step of the way, there's a hurdle. And what UNICEF is doing now in a very systematic way is trying to figure out what are those barriers for the most disadvantaged communities and how can we tackle them one at a time to get rid of them in particular contexts, trying to do that in a country-specific way, because that's the way to tackle this.
A quick follow-up, too, about the vaccines. This was another question. You mentioned the vaccine. Well, we obviously talked about the one for measles, which we have here in this country, MMR. Any parent in the audience knows about that. But you also mentioned vaccines for pneumonia and diarrhea, and this person asks if there are any new ones in the pipeline.
The newest one in the pipeline that should be available for use in about 2 years, I think, is the malaria vaccine. So the clinical study has shown efficacy, and we're hoping that it'll be available and ready pretty soon. That's going to make a huge difference too. But for malaria, bed nets make a big difference, just mosquito nets. And we're doing a much better job now of getting those out there for everyone to be able to use.
This is a tweet that I just received from the audience. 4E Good asks, and maybe Chrysula could answer this question, what hurdles do you face in creating success? And I think one of the initial hurdles when you're blogging or on Twitter or trying to enter the social world is, I only have 10 likes or 4 followers. And it's sort of this notion that you've got to stick with it, that the voice will be heard. It takes some time.
It does take some time, and the core to that is just, what are your motives? Why are you in it? And figuring out what your message is and staying true to it. Having said that, this might sound like a contradiction, but also not being afraid to expand your view and find new topics to write about. It will come. There's an enormous amount of noise out there. We all know that. I used to read every single blog that I was passionate about every single day, and I just can't physically do that anymore, and I'm sure most of you are the same. So there is that competition, but it's not a competition, actually, because we all share each other's stories, and we all build our own communities. Everyone has a voice that is valuable. This is an incredible democratic revolution.
Do you have any hints, clues? I mean, we know hashtags for Twitter, or, I mean, how do you get people to come to the blog who don't know it exists?
First of all, you rely on your very own community. You start with your own Facebook friends and your family, and you pester them, and then one day you get a comment that's not your mother, and that's just an incredibly exciting step forward. And Twitter has been an absolute gift for me, an absolute gift. I've been on Twitter for a couple of years, and I'm still learning the ropes. But I've met some extraordinary people, and spending some time reading blogs, but writing. Twitter makes you a better writer. So that, if for no other reason, go on Twitter to hone your writing skills.
And writing in, they talk about 140 characters or less, and it seems like a lot of folks think, well, we're becoming attention deficit, or that we're not writing as well because we have to pick so few characters. And I always find it's a bigger challenge to write with fewer spaces, a smaller opportunity, which is, on the evening news when they tell you we're cutting your time down to 50 seconds or 45, and we fight every word to keep it in. I want to ask the next question, what are the other diseases of most concern? And Geeta, perhaps you could take that. That also came in from someone.
Well, the biggest killers of children are currently diarrhea and pneumonia for children under 5, and malaria. Those are the 3 big ones. Polio is now, as I said, being reduced. Measles, we've had great impact on with the measles vaccine, though there's a lot more to be done. And as you probably saw in Somalia, there's new outbreaks of measles all the time, though Somalia is one of the countries that had only 30 or 40% coverage of vaccination anyway. So it's a tough context in which to make that happen.
And you mentioned the diarrhea. I mean, the hospital, they're losing 10 to 15 children a day at the Mogadishu hospital. Yes. 4 doctors for 300 children.
Yeah, diarrhea, with the dehydration, and this is the tragedy, because it doesn't require, it's not expensive solutions with oral rehydration therapy, which is, salt, water, sugar, and with zinc tablets, which should be very cheap. It's possible to save a child's life, and that can be delivered by anybody. A mother can use it for her child.
Possible to save a child's life, delivered by anyone. And I wondered if Chrysula had a closing thought. We have just a few moments left.
You have a voice, use it. Share.
Get involved is the other thing I want to say. Get involved. Use your voice, your writing talent, your connections, your networks.
And I'll read these 2 thoughts. These two tweets that just came in from the audience. We are part of a global community, social good, the hashtag for today. Blogging and the voices online can help connect us in a global way, and I think these two panelists are proof of that. Dr. Rao Gupta and Chrysula, thank you so much. ChrysulawInegar.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.